Roch the wind and the clear day's dawing, blaws the clouds, he'll stir gaudy o'er the bay. But there's mair nor a roch wind blowing through the great glen of the world the day. It's a thought that would gather rottens all the rogues that gang gallows fresh and gay. Tak the road and seek other lonens where your ill ploys stay sport and play.
Scotland has a long-standing history of going its own road, of leaning left toward the benefit of society and not the benefit of the rich or the landowners. It is no wonder, then, that the Labour Party's beginnings were in 1900 Scotland, rising out of the trade union movement and socialist political parties of the late 1800s. The Labour Party gave a voice to the working-class poor in Scotland and spread quickly to stand for the disadvantaged workers all over the UK. It was founded by a lay preacher, Keir Hardie, whose empathy for the struggles of the poor is legendary, whose caring for people over corporations is undeniable. However, in the light of the developments during the referendum and since, with Labour upholding and backing Tory policies, and with Gordon Brown's infamous vow not being delivered, a question needs to be asked. Is Labour really the Labour Party of Keir Hardie? Let's hear what a long-time Labour voter says about it.
I was a third-generation card-carrying Labour Party member. I might even be fourth generation, I don't know. My great-grandfather was a mine worker, so probably. But his chest was crushed in a mining accident when my dad was a child, so I can't be sure. Dad watched his grandfather die of his injuries on the settee at home. It was in the 1930s, before Labour started the NHS, and all his fellow mine workers could do was put him on the back of a cart and push him home to die. The family couldn't afford treatment. His employers didn't care. There was no employee protection then. My dad never forgot seeing that. His dad, my granddad, was a miner too. Granddad lost his job in the 30s and with a friend cycled from Durham to London to find work to support his family. That was in the days before Labour introduced welfare support and child benefit. Like many of his generation, my dad saw a lot of hardships. I think it's what led him to becoming a socialist. He was an active shop steward in the London docks and fought for workers' rights. His sister, my aunt, was also a union activist. She took part in the Dagenham Ford Machinists' strike for equal pay for women, the strike that led to the Equal Pay Act under Labour. She benefited so many in this generation by standing firm through that tough time. With that background, it's no surprise that I joined the Labour Party. My dad took me along to the local branch in Pinnicut when I was 13 to help stuff envelopes. I'd heard all about how Keir Hardie fought for the workers, how Labour had stood solidly for the people and their rights, so kids wouldn't have to watch their grandfathers die at home from pit injuries. My family's story is nothing unusual. Get any older person talking and you'll hear the same thing about how it was before Keir Hardie. How Labour was born of the working people, and how ordinary people stood with them, the party of social justice, to fight the oppression of the Tories, the party of the rich. They will tell you how Labour supported William Beveridge's recommendations to fight against the 5 evils in society: squalor, ignorance, want, idleness and disease. Labour brought in social progress innovations on national insurance, education, housing and the NHS to deal with those evils. I was committed to Labour. I was Labour forever, or so I thought. I was wrong. I thought Labour would always be the party of Keir Hardie, the party of the people and of social justice. I could never have imagined that they would walk hand in hand with Thatcher's Tories. How dare Labour betray us and take part in the destruction of the NHS that our parents and grandparents fought for? How dare they sign up to sanction the disabled, the mentally ill and and those in need. Labour politicians are now millionaires, paying lip service to the people as they change their colours from red to blue. With my family history of fighting for social justice, I had no option. I had to tear up my Labour Party membership card. Labour are no longer my party, or the party my dad and granddad supported. Instead, the SNP, Greens and SSP are the ones fighting for us. It is they, not Labour, who care about housing, jobs and the NHS. I took the final step on 23rd of November 2014 and joined the SNP. The Labour Party have announced that they will follow the Tory policy of cuts and austerity. Not if I have anything to do with it, they won't.
We wondered what ordinary Scots had to say about the future of Scotland, what they wanted for their children and grandchildren, and what they wanted for their beloved country. Which direction should Scotland take, and what party or parties would be best to take them into the future? What do you feel is the most urgent thing that needs to be changed to improve the lives of people in Scotland, and why?
The single most important change that can be made is for the policies and principles that people of Scotland vote for to be reflected in the government that they get. Too often in the past that's not been the case, and we've been saddled with a government that's out of touch and really does not reflect the needs or the wishes of the people of Scotland. We're a remarkable country. We've always punched above our weight when given the opportunity to do so, and I think having a government that reflects the policies and principles that we vote for will create more opportunities and will continue to achieve great things.
We need more powers. We need more powers to the Scottish Government so we can decide ourselves the economic levers, these fiscal levers. I mean, taxing things properly like oil and that, and it's all very well this so-called vow giving us like some kind of taxation powers, but what's the point in having taxation powers when you ain't got the power to get in the money in the first place? It's like having a car with a steering wheel and wheels but no engine or brakes. And how are you supposed to control that? No way.
Well, I voted yes to independence for Scotland in the recent referendum. There are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the top reasons has got to be not just social justice but poverty. A lot of people in Scotland are living in poverty, a lot of children in Scotland, a lot of families are living in poverty. I think that's an important thing to address. I think if people haven't got decent homes to live in and they can't feed their kids, that's very urgent.
I feel the most urgent thing that needs to be changed to improve the lives of the people in Scotland is their general well-being. They need to be earning a decent wage which can take them off benefits and make sure they never need to have to go to a food bank to make sure that their family's fed. And I think that is priority. In a Scotland today, we should not have people sleeping on the streets, or people homeless, or people so hungry that they need to go to a food bank. That has to be changed.
For me, the answer to this question is summed up best with the word empowerment. In Scotland, we've got the means, the capacity and the intellectual know-how to improve the lives of the people who live in our country. We've also got the motivation. No one else is going to be motivated to change lives for the better in Scotland more than the people of Scotland. And improving the lives of our country, the lives of the people in our country is never going to be a priority for the London-centric parties. And I think it's very telling that those who promised us we're better together in the referendum clearly don't want Scottish representation in Westminster, and for me that makes a mockery of the concept of democracy.
The most urgent thing we need is for this place to have the powers we were promised, not the feeble, watered-down version in the Smith report. The vow was for home rule, and that's what I expect. We need to control our own affairs, whether it's in or out of the UK. Scotland has very different attitudes and principles to most of the south of England. We need to be free to control our own affairs in the way we want to and not be dictated to by Westminster.
I think the most urgent thing is to have more power devolved to Scotland, to give us the opportunity to spend money in Scotland where needed, be it in education or a health service or whatever. We need to have more powers now, as was promised to us, as soon as possible.
We have so much information from newspapers, TV, and social media. What news sources do you trust the most and why?
The news sources I trust the most are those which are independently funded, independently written or produced, and which are clear about their political stance or their own agenda, if you like. For me, mainstream media, and I include the BBC in that, is little more than propaganda in this country. And that applies not only to what's going on in our own country, but also all around the world. The news that we are spoon-fed is based on what our government wants us to think, the truth that they want us to believe, the stories they want our attention detracted from. And from my own experience, that's been proven time and time again over the last 2 years or so, since social media awakened me politically. It gave me access to information that I didn't have before. And it's taught me that in order to know the truth and to understand the truth, you have to look for it yourself. You have to verify information from independent sources. My involvement with the mainstream media now is little more than to understand what the state narrative is on any given day.
I trust the Sunday Herald, the National and the internet for my resources of information.
I like to go onto the internet and go onto Facebook and onto Twitter to find my information on what's going on in Scotland.
I used to be a massive supporter of the BBC. Whenever I used to see people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever moaning about their TV licence fee, I used to say, well, look what you're getting. It's like a subscription service for 140 odd quid a year. You're getting this radio channels, these TV channels, quality TV programming. You didn't have to put up the adverts in the middle, so it was a really good service. But during the referendum, I started to see another side to the BBC, especially. It was, rather than being a public broadcaster, they turned into like a state broadcast station, a bit like that you would get in Northern Korea or something like that. But it's propaganda and the bias. And they're saying it's a very thin line between the bias and just bad journalism, basically. You need to take proper effort to make sure that it was a balanced view was coming across. So I didn't trust the BBC anymore. The rest of the media, like the print media, that was blatant. They're allowed, there's nothing stopping them having a bias, and they took advantage of it quite a lot in favour of the UK. But now this is to do with Westminster. You're seeing a similar thing, but it's anti-SNP on the TV and in the media. They're totally anti-SNP, so I didn't trust them at all. I get my news from, I sit and watch Twitter and Facebook, but mostly Twitter, because if you follow news sources, you get the new media. Wings Over Scotland, Bella Caledonia, Newsnet Scotland. I listen to podcasts. You get a lot of good podcasts like Leslie Riddick's podcast, the News Shaft podcast. Derek Bateman is excellent, I thoroughly recommend. That's where I get my media, and I trust them more than I would trust any of the old guard, as it were.
The one thing I do enjoy reading is the National and the Sunday Herald. I feel that they give a good, unbiased coverage of what's happening today. If there's something to criticise, they'll criticise it, but I feel it's well reported and it's well worth reading. And I get one every day and have to get home with it for my husband because he's desperate to get it. I don't really trust television at all and take everything that I hear with a pinch of salt. So there's not many. Social media I enjoy. I think we get a lot of truth on those, but I think it is very, very difficult for people in general today to realise that they're being told lies through the BBC, because that's something I personally never thought I would see happen, and was disgusted the way it happened during the referendum.
I tend to trust mostly social media based news sources. For a long time I did believe in the BBC, but it was sure up to be totally biased during the referendum campaign. So now I would say sources like the Herald, the Sunday Herald, the National, Wings Over Scotland, and a few other. There's a load out there. At the end of the day, it's an opinion, but I certainly favour the ones that I've just mentioned.
John McTernan, Jim Murphy's chief of staff, supports fracking and claims it helps tackle climate change. Scientists have reported that fracking pollutes water and can release methane, a worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Are you happy with Labour's policy of bringing fracking to Scotland in the Central Belt, at Loch Ness, Stirling, and other locations? Or do you have concerns about the long-term effects on Scotland's water?
McTernan is clearly as bad at science as he is at diplomacy. Remember, he's the one who emailed a Labour MSP who was going to Sweden, and he wrote, and I quote, "If you've not been to Sweden before, I think you'll really like it. It's the country Scotland would be if it wasn't narrow, Presbyterian, racist, etc, etc." So that's what he thinks of us. If McTernan told me the date, I'd still check my calendar.
I'm really quite unhappy about the Labour Party policy of potentially introducing fracking to Scotland. Scotland's a lovely country. We've got a great renewable sector, we've got an oil and gas sector, we have wave power, wind power, hydropower. We really don't need another technology, particularly when the benefits are so hotly disputed. And whilst the advantages and disadvantages are in doubt, what's not in doubt is that fracking will benefit the shareholders of the private companies that are potentially going to be involved in introducing this technology. It's less likely to benefit the people of Scotland.
Where John McTiernan gets his reasoning and his logic in saying that fracking is actually better for climate change than renewables, I just didn't get it. All these chemicals is coming out, polluting the water table, coming out and God knows where it's gone. I think the Scottish Government has taken the right approach to this, because the newly enlivened Scottish electorate was up raising arms against their policies on fracking. They did a moratorium and thought twice, so they said, okay, we're going to look at it. There needs to be a lot more experiments into finding out and research into what actually happens. It's just for a quick fix of money. Nah.
The whole idea of fracking to me is just simply ludicrous. We don't need it and we don't want it in Scotland. And the issue of fracking is just yet another example of a hugely harmful decision that's been taken for us and presented as a fait accompli without any element of open debate or democratic choice. It again flags to me that Labour is a London-centric party and never will be truly interested in what is best for the people of Scotland.
First of all, I think it can be shown that in the United States there are potentially serious, unpredictable effects from onshore fracking. The poisonous chemicals get into the water table, get into the water supply, that affects farming, that affects our water supply. You know, it's almost a no-brainer, because to me it seems fairly clear that fracking is not environmentally sound. And I agree with the Scottish Government that we should be very cautious about it and should fully know what the long-term effects are before we go ahead with doing it.
I am very much against fracking because I feel it's been untried. We don't know sufficient about it, and in New York State they've stopped it because of the damage to the environment and to the water table, and we don't want that happening here. I'm a grandmother, 3 granddaughters, and I have to think of their future, and we should not start this now and leave it for future generations to find out what the downside is of fracking. It's not necessary at the moment. Anyway, oil prices are so low, we don't need to take anything else out of the ground.
Do you trust Westminster to do what is right for all the people of Scotland? Why or why not?
Do I trust Westminster? No. Even the Scottish end of the Westminster party seem to know little about Scotland. As an example, look at this great feat of engineering, the new Queensferry crossing. It's the largest construction project in a generation in Scotland. You think the politicians would know a bit about it, eh? Yet the Labour deputy leader in Scotland asked why the Scottish government are using imported Chinese steel to build the bridge. Really? Is she so politically unaware that she's forgotten that the Tories decimated the Scottish steel industry and closed Ravenscraig? That's the same Westminster Tory party that Labour held hands with during the referendum campaign. Why on earth would I trust political illiterates like that? I want people who love Scotland to represent us, people who care about it, people who want to build a future with us, not tear us down and badmouth us.
I want to see the scarce resources of the country invested in the future of our children, invested in health, in education, in protecting the most vulnerable in our society. I don't want to see a single penny, let alone £100 billion spent on Trident nuclear weapons.
I really don't believe that the Westminster government can be trusted to look after the best interests of Scotland. What I do believe, however, is that they can be trusted to look after their own best interests. They've proven that time and time again, and some examples include the expenses scandal, the misuse and abuse of public privilege and public funds, and probably the worst example of hypocrisy ever, approving pay rises for themselves in excess of 10%, whilst at the same time severely restricting pay rises that were given to workers in the public sector, emergency service workers, nurses and teachers, etc.
I don't trust Westminster to do what's right for all the people of Scotland, because we have read so much in the media and heard so much in the media the way they've tried to pull Scotland down, and we're more or less told that we've had a referendum, why don't you just run away into a corner and disappear? And I think as far as David Cameron is concerned, and the rest of them, they would be only too happy if Scotland had felt downtrodden and been very dispirited after the result of the referendum. But instead, they've been absolutely sickened with the wave of nationalism that has swept the country, and it's not going to go away. And personally, I want to die in an independent Scotland, so the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned.
This is a resounding no to this question. It's been proven time and time again that Westminster's got no motivation to do what's right for the people of Scotland. I would actually go as far as to say that I don't trust Westminster to do the best for the people of the UK either. It's a parliament based on archaic process and nepotism rather than democracy. It's nothing more than a glorified pantomime of posturing egos that stand to serve the establishment rather than people it's supposed to represent.
No, I don't trust Westminster to do what's right for all the people of Scotland, because they've never done anything what's right for all the people of Scotland. They've done what's right for Westminster every time. Let's shove the nuclear weapons up there, let's test it out with the poll tax when Thatcher was on the go. They've got a track record in not doing what's putting the people of Scotland first. It's time we had somebody doing in Westminster that's actually standing up for the people of Scotland to give ourselves a voice, because we haven't had a voice for a long time, and it's have we ever had a voice? No, I don't trust them.
Do you think that the draft legislation to deliver more powers to the Scottish Parliament honours the commitment given to the people of Scotland?
No, I don't. Again, come back to the vow. We were promised near federalism, the Devo Max. It hasn't been delivered. They're lying again.
We're moving quite close, in my view, to something near to federalism.
The vow is yet another broken promise from Westminster. In September last year, Gordon Brown said there'd been a cross-party deal on more powers. He said it would be, and I quote, nothing less than a modern form of Scottish Home Rule. And he also said it would be as close to federal state as the UK can be. He's on film saying it, and it was widely reported in the press. It was a deal. Subsequently, the infamous vow, printed on the front of a Daily Record on the 16th of September, just 2 days before the vote, and breaking the Purdah rules, said there would be, and I quote again, extensive new powers. Where is this federalism? Where are these powers? Well, what have we actually been given? Well, before the ballot boxes had even been put back into storage, we had Cameron at Downing Street announcing there'd only be new powers if it was part of a package with new powers for England. That wasn't what was promised. We know that the London parties were leaving the talks to contact their bosses down south for permission on what they could agree to. We know that someone in the room released the information before the meeting was even adjourned, so they could put their spin on it first. Having power over our own road signs does not compensate for having no control over 80% of our welfare budget or 70% of our taxes.
Hip hip hooray, we've got, we're in charge of road signs, I think is what we've got. We've got a few tax breaks and tax levers that nobody in their right mind would touch with a barge pole, because you can't be taxing people without taking control of the tax, without taking control of the revenue. And that just doesn't work. So no, the promises made, especially by old Brunei, old Gordon Zilla himself, we was got to give us like the next best thing to home rule, a federal UK. Aye, right. That's never got to happen, and we knew it was never going to happen. And unfortunately, he scared the pensioners into thinking they were lose their pensions as well. So they fell for it, and we lost duped.
For a start, we keep getting told what we're moaning about. We've got control over our own tax. We only have control over 30% of our tax. So many other things are controlled by Westminster, and there is no way they will give us any more. The only way we can get everything that is needed for Scotland is to be independent and be in full control of our own destiny.
When you read the vow, it doesn't promise much. What it promises is that the Scottish Parliament will be permanent and that the National Health Service in Scotland will remain in Scottish hands. Now, neither of those things have been delivered, because power devolved is power retained. To say that the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament is permanent is just fallacious. No government can say that, because each government lasts for 5 years in the UK and a subsequent government could abolish it. A similar story goes for keeping the NHS in Scotland's hands. First of all, the NHS in Scotland is funded using the Barnett formula, which means that consequentially whatever funding is available for that department in England, a proportion of that is available for the equivalent department in Scotland. In short, what this means is if they reduce the funding for the health service in England, there will be a reduction in health service funding in Scotland. So far so good. That still means that it's in Scottish hands, but it does severely curtail the ability of Scotland to look after its own NHS in the way that it might be able to were it completely independent. Labour backbencher Gordon Brown, he made several comments which have to some extent been subsequently denied by his Labour colleagues. However, it is true that Gordon Brown promised Scotland a form of near federalism within 2 years if we voted no to independence. Basically, he promised us the earth on a stick, you know. It is clear that we're not going to get federalism, and it's not going to happen within 2 years. In fact, what is clear is that Mr. Brown is stepping down from politics. He's retiring from politics. The Smith Commission negotiations and proposals essentially, you know, were done in such a hurry that they ignored the wishes of the Scottish people, and they ultimately ended up being a compromise between the 5 political parties who were involved. 3 of those political parties being unionist parties. They don't have Scotland's interests as a priority. In short, however, I don't think Scotland's got anything like what it was promised.
In a recent BBC News article, Scottish Labour leader Jim Murphy has said he believes it would be wrong for the Labour Party to scrap Trident. What do you think about the Labour-Tory plan to spend $100 billion on Trident nuclear weapons?
Well, it goes without saying that in these times of austerity and poverty, it's insane to spend £100 billion on weapons of mass destruction, which were originally designed for the Cold War. It is true that we could nuke something like 2/3 of the planet with our Trident nuclear submarines. However, we never will, because if we did, it would be the end of the world, basically. So I would say, what is the point of those weapons? I would also say, we supposedly marched into Iraq because they had nuclear weapons of mass destruction. That was enough for us to march in and destroy their entire existing regime. How is it then ethical for us to do exactly the same thing? And Iraq didn't even have weapons of mass destruction, we now know. And that was a Labour government lying to us. Those nuclear weapons are in the Clyde estuary, which is remarkably close to the UK's 4th biggest city, Scotland's biggest city, Glasgow. And I also happen to know that in the Clyde Basin there's an awful lot of oil which could be extracted for Scotland's benefit and which isn't being extracted because it will affect the operation of the nuclear submarines. I think that if a hostile nation wanted to attack Britain's nuclear weapons, it would be Glasgow that would feel the force of it first, and I think that if there was a nuclear accident in the Trident programme, that it would be the people of Glasgow that would suffer the fallout. So far, as you can hear, I haven't got a single positive thing to say about the Trident nuclear weapons programme, even if it were free. So to spend £100 billion on that project, which could be used to feed starving families, or to house the homeless, or to regenerate the economy, it seems insane. The fact that our two main parties unequivocally support this Trident nuclear weapons renewal programme seems insane. The electorate seems to just accept that if both main parties agree on something, there's nothing we can do about it. We've got to vote for one or the other to be in government, and that's it. So if they both agree on something, then that's what we're getting. And that's how Westminster operates.
In just over 30 days' time, we have a chance to change the out-of-touch, remote Westminster system, not just in the interests of ordinary people across Scotland, but in the interests of ordinary people right across the UK. We have a chance to say to that out-of-touch Westminster system, your priorities are not our priorities, and the people intend to rewrite your priorities so that they serve ordinary people across our country.
Spending £100 billion on a nuclear deterrent that we're never going to use, and we're not under threat. Don't let them scare you into thinking that Vladimir Putin's ready with a drone to come over or on his horse to come fleeing over and start whacking us about the head with a stick, because he's not. When we've got you've got a country that's 1.5 trillion in debt, and then their austerity measures that they're putting in place, penalising the most vulnerable in our society. We've got the disabled and the poor, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll steal all the money for them, we'll hold back money for them, and then let's spend £100 billion on this total white elephant or nuclear weapons that are never going to be needed. It's ridiculous, basically.
It's beyond me how anyone can justify spending £100 billion on Trident when we've got kids that aren't being fed, we've got pensioners that can't afford to heat their homes, we've got people living on the streets, including veterans, and we've got a health service on the brink of collapse. Our education system's also in disarray. Realistically, if we need these weapons for defence, you've got to ask the question, who are we defending ourselves from? The only people that have invaded Scottish lands in the last 300 years are the English. The wealth of the UK, of Great Britain, is based on invading other people's countries, and that's what we continue to do to this day. The thing about Trident as well, it doesn't make us safer, it puts us in more danger, because Fastlane is nothing more than a giant target sign painted onto the side of Scotland. It would be a primary target for anyone wishing to disable Great Britain or the United Kingdom. And I believe that in this Scotland really needs to distance itself from Westminster's warmongering on all levels, and we need to establish ourselves as a peace-loving nation on a global platform and use the money instead to tackle poverty in our own country and look after our own citizens rather than lining the pockets of weapons manufacturers.
I think it's an obscene amount of money to spend on weapons of mass destruction. We know they're not going to use them. Nobody is going to use them. We're not fighting a Cold War anymore. We're fighting terrorism, which is quite often done via the internet. There's young Muslims especially being radicalised in their own communities. Let's spend some of this 100 billion on education, get people into that communities, find out how we can stop this, and in the process maybe save a few lives.
What would you prefer? The NHS as a nationalised service, free at the point of need, or a privatised business run by for-profit companies and subject to free market forces?
Pre-NHS, when she was a little girl, my mum was sent out to try and find a doctor on a Sunday to attend her very ill little brother. He was running a fever and was delirious. She found one eventually, but of course they had to pay. My granny had to use her rent money to pay the doctor, so she got into rent arrears. The NHS is certainly not perfect, but I think a lot of people have forgotten what times were like before we had it. How can we go back to that in the 20th century? Free healthcare is critical.
The National Health Service was set up in the UK to be free at the point of need and to provide comprehensive healthcare for every citizen from the cradle to the grave. That is an ideal which I support. I realise that the NHS has effectively done itself a great disservice by lengthening people's lifespan and by curing a lot of diseases, because now people have more complicated and expensive diseases and they live longer and are more infirm in their old age, and the NHS has to pick up the burden. However, I don't see how privatising it's going to help that. I think that if you're going to have a national health service, then have a national health service. That's what I think. I think that if we pay for it in our taxes and we get that service, then great, that's what it's for, that's how it's funded. I think that privatising any public service simply lowers quality standards and potentially increases costs. I think we can see that from the rail network, I think we can see it from the post office, I think we can see it from anything that's been privatised. I think governments just make a quick buck on privatisation and then the service goes to pot as the infrastructure is neglected. It is a cross-party initiative in actual fact, or at least it was 60 or 70 years ago in 1948. When it first was put together, it's just another Labour lie that they're the party of the NHS. If anything, they're just another Tory party wanting to privatise public services and get away with it in the eyes of the public.
This is a difficult question. The easy way to say that is, yes, let's say the NHS free at the point of need, which we definitely need at the point of need. Privatise a couple of bits of it just to get the waiting list doing or whatever, like just the way that they're already doing it. When it comes to privatising bigger bits, I mean, the private guys are going to come in and they've got to take the lucrative parts of it. They've got to cherry pick the lucrative parts of the NHS, the bits that make the money. It should be like a kind of one part covers the other. The bits it's losing money should be covered by the bits it's making money. But it should all be more money. Us as a community, as a country, free to point of need, privatised only if very, very, very essentially needed.
The NHS is of great personal importance to me. Most of my family members worked at some point or continue to work within the NHS. I've got twin sons who were born 3 months prematurely and whose lives were saved by the NHS and were cared for at no less than 4 Scottish hospitals before their discharge. The problem with the NHS is that private companies see it as a cash cow. I've worked for one of those private companies and I understand the internal workings of the NHS, how the procurement systems work. Privatisation will signal the death toll of the NHS. It's already happening. The NHS needs to be kept in public hands and the health of patients needs to be put before profit. Perhaps more like a private company in terms of streamlining and efficiency. Privatisation and exploiting people's ill health for profit is not only bad for the NHS itself, but it's also unethical, I believe.
There is no way I would like to see the NHS privatised at all. I've been to America, I have relatives in America, and I realise how lucky we are. My husband got a replacement hip and knee, and I've had 2 replacement knees, all free. And that is the way it should be. That is the way I hope we can keep it. Otherwise, then you are being run by companies that are only interested in making a profit for their shareholders. They're not interested in the individual. And we would end up being like America, where there would be a percentage of people who cannot get treatment because they cannot afford the insurance. We do not want to see that happen here.
What goals are important for the future of Scotland's children and grandchildren? Do you believe that Labour or the SNP are best placed to accomplish these goals, and why?
I think the SNP are the party to realise the goals for our children and grandchildren. What we need, in my view, really comes down to education, and make sure that education is free from primary school to university for the future generations. We also need to make sure that we are creating industry in Scotland, and we have plenty of new technologies available to us, especially in the renewable market. That could be a growth sector. But let's get a manufacturing base in Scotland, making these renewable technology equipment, be it tidal power machinery or wind farm machinery, windmills. At the moment we seem to be importing these things. Why can't we build them here?
In Independent Scotland, we commit to end child poverty.
I believe we must restore Scotland's faith in herself and show our kids how great Scotland is. I think too many have fallen for the too wee, too poor, too stupid propaganda from Westminster. We need to encourage them to be the very best. Look at this, the Kelpies. Scottish engineering and art at their very best in one creation. We have a wonderful history of inventing great things to benefit the world. Everyone learns about Bell with a telephone and Logie Baird with TV, Napier with those awful logarithms. We know we invented the fridge, flush toilet and vacuum flask. Heck, we even know the Bank of England was devised by a Scot, William Paterson. But we need to shout out loud that Scotland isn't just about our history. We have a bright future too. The first beta-blocker drugs were developed by a Scot in the 1960s. You can thank a Scot for the MRI body scanner in our hospitals too. Our education system is still churning out amazing people. In 2013, St Andrews University had a world's first when they created a functioning tractor beam that pulled objects. We need to keep our free education system. We need to be able to encourage foreign students to stay here and work with us. We can't do that when we are stuck with immigration policies that are designed to meet England's needs and not Scotland's. Even more importantly, we must find ways to let our youth choose to stay and work in Scotland and not be forced abroad because of the job situation here. We need to get our kids looking forward to a positive future.
I think the SNP are best placed for bringing forward the goals for the children and grandchildren, along with what we need is good, radical land reform to put the country into public ownership for once in its lifetime. Get the land sorted out, and maybe there might be a case for, I think Leslie Riddick mentioned this, where everybody that's born in Scotland has a birthright. Education, free education is the key, as well as land is the bedrock, and free education is the key. Because education lifts people out of poverty. The more educated you get, the more likely you get a better job. And then retaining the education as well is very important. So keeping tuition fees free for Scottish students is very important. Get back to manufacturing. We're really good at making things. We always have been. We're world renowned for inventing and making things. Let's get back to being like the envy of the world.
I think the goals that are important for the future of Scotland's children and grandchildren is to live in as an environmentally clean atmosphere as we can, nuclear-free country, where social justice is a priority, and everybody tries to care for everybody else. They care what happens to everybody else. I'd like to see it free of racial hatred, bigotry of any kind, religious or racial. And I think the SNP are best placed to deliver these, because this is what they also believe in. They've already demonstrated they are against racism and bigotry, sexism, all these things the SNP are against. And that is why I joined the SNP, and I'm campaigning vigorously for this election, because I want to see an absolute majority of Scottish MPs going down to Westminster. As a retired teacher, I should not have missed was free education. I think the way the Scottish Government have delivered free education, higher education and further education for all of the Scottish students, I think is absolutely incredible. This is the first election in my lifetime that Scotland's vote has ever meant anything.
Scotland's needs are not being met as part of the UK, so I would rule out any party which actively believes Scotland should stay in the UK as a serious contender for a party which can be trusted to deliver Scotland's requirements over the coming generations. I think there's a good argument to say that a party which is primarily based in Scotland will have Scotland's needs as a priority more than a party which is primarily based in the rest of the UK. I know that the Labour Party has its roots in Scotland 100 years ago, but I am also aware that they are very much a UK party based in the southeast of England, and that's not a slanderous comment about England, it's just a fact. And I think that, you know, the SNP and the Scottish Green Party and even the Scottish Socialist Party are parties who specifically operate from Scotland. Their politicians are concerned almost exclusively with Scotland and how the world looks from a Scottish point of view. And that's why I think that the SNP, which have far greater support than those other two parties I mentioned, are probably best placed to look after our needs in the short term. I think in the long term, if and when Scotland becomes independent, I hope to see a multi-party system rather than a two-party system like we have in the UK. And that multi-party system can be more coalition-based. Perhaps it doesn't need to be adversarial with a governmental party and an opposition. Perhaps it can have elected representatives more like the Scottish Parliament is now. You know, these things can happen in independent Scotland. In the meantime, as part of the UK, I don't think we're going to see a huge lot of change. I know that this surge in popularity for the SNP is a huge change. It has moved from one existing party to another existing party to give them a chance. Labour has failed its chance time and time again. You know, as a nation we've voted Labour for generations, and where has it got us? We'll try another party and see what happens. Although, I have to say I do agree with the Scottish Green Party's policies far more. And there's a lot of things I wish the SNP would have in their policies. I wish they would come out against TTIP in all its forms, rather than just saying they would oppose it in the NHS. I think the SNP are clever enough to prioritise the needs of and wants of the people of Scotland. And I think that for now, they're the party we need to get behind.
The views you've heard expressed in this film are real and held by many people of all parties. What they have in common is that they want the best for Scotland and for ordinary people all across the United Kingdom. They want a voice in Westminster that speaks for them. Many Labour Party members and some Liberal Democrats are leaving their old parties and planning to vote for and even join the SNP. We welcome this, as we see Scotland standing together to fight the old boys' network and the austerity being inflicted from Westminster. Why are people changing and moving away from long-held beliefs?
Labour was a great party. They came from the people, from Keir Hardie's yearning for a better, fairer life for us. They fought for working people and legislated for fundamentals of social justice, the NHS, pensions and welfare. I joined because they fought for me. But things changed. Not us. It was Labour that changed. We kept voting for them because it took a while to realise that it wasn't really our Labour Party anymore. It was becoming Tory light. Hopefully, when Labour realise they need to work with the SNP at Westminster, the experience of ex-Labour members within the SNP can help to get Labour on the right track and keep them honest for the benefit of the whole UK. I hope more of my Labour brothers and sisters will join me in the Scottish parties. I feel energised and re-motivated by the SNP. Nicola Sturgeon seems keen to bring the whole UK back on course, back to social justice, back to caring for working people. She stands for everything that Labour betrayed. Let's get back to a government for the people.
So what now for Scotland? We voted against independence in September, so we remain part of the United Kingdom. That means we must, for now, lift our eyes to embrace the whole UK. What do we want from Westminster? More of the same? Or do we still want change? Change to benefit not only Scotland, but the whole UK, England, Wales and Northern Ireland too. The reaction to Nicola Sturgeon from the rest of the UK has been tremendous. It seems that people all over the UK are realizing they were duped by the London media, that the SNP are their friends, and they are as hungry for change as we are. While we remain in the UK, we must work to benefit all, and we can only do that by returning as many SNP MPs to Westminster as we can. We cannot form a UK government on our own, but together with Plead Cymru and the Greens, we can be a major force for change by working together with other UK parties in the best interest of the whole UK. Whilst we won't lose our long-term goal of independence, in the meantime, we can be a part of a united, multinational government for a truly united kingdom. So, it seems undeniable that voting for the SNP will be the most effective way to guarantee that Scotland and the rest of the UK get the changes, the modernization, if you will, that the government so clearly needs. Please cast your vote wisely on the 7th of May to help make this happen.
As long as Scotland remains part of the Westminster system, we have a shared interest with you in making that system work better for all of us, in making it work for the many, not the few. We will not do any deals that would put the Tories into power. Indeed, if there is an anti-Tory majority after May the 7th, we will vote to stop a new Tory government even getting off the ground. But we will then seek to use our influence positively and constructively to make a Labour government bolder and better. We will seek to make common cause and build alliances with others of like mind across the UK to deliver the progressive change that so many want to see. And we will bring to that task 8 years' experience of government, of successful, effective and stable government.
Who just voted for another bloody war? Wasn't it me? Wasn't it me? We voted to be fracked, to carpet bomb Iraq. Wasn't it me? Wasn't it me? We voted to be used as a military base. Who asked to keep their Trident submarines? Who didn't take a chance? Who shit their tartan pants? Wasn't it me? 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 who just signed away the future of their wains. Wasn't me? Wasn't me? Can you look them in the eye? 'Cause you didn't even try. Wasn't me? It wasn't me. Who just put yourselves before the national health? Who thought there wasn't oil left in the sea? Who swallowed other lies? Your spineless 55. Wasn't me? It wasn't me. Wasn't me? Wasn't me? Wasn't me? Who believed the crap for the Labour Tory Pact? Wasn't me? Wasn't me? The animals that pick on the disabled and the sick. Wasn't me? It wasn't me. You should be ashamed to call this land your home. Who never had the common sense to see? Who cowered down and bleated like a flock of frightened sheep? It wasn't me, it wasn't me. You swallowed other lies, your spineless 55. Wasn't me, it wasn't me. It wasn't